Welcome to episode 145 of the Microsoft Cloud IT Pro podcast, recorded live September 27th, 2019. This is a show about Office 365 and Azure from the perspective of IT pros and end users, where we discuss a topic or recent news and how it relates to you. In this episode, we continue our acronym soup discussion around information protection and discuss AIP pricing, sensitivity labels, and retention labels.
Boom, you're recording.
The easy record button.
I used to have an easy button.
Did you?
Yeah, I used to keep it on my desk when I worked at one of the 86 different companies I've worked at. People used to walk in my office and we'd solve a problem and hit the easy button. That was easy.
I'm going to ask if the easy button worked, but you always pushed it after the problem was easy, not when you needed an easy solution to the problem.
After we solved the problem. But that should tell you how long ago that was, because I had an office and I haven't been in an office building where people have offices in a very long time.
So was this like an office with walls or like a cubicle?
Like walls and a door and stuff.
They actually put you in one? Did they want to keep you separate from everybody else?
Blown, right? Well, I can play nice with others, but I need my alone time. I'm kind of like, in Spaceballs when Dark Helmet goes into his office and he just has to play with his little figurines and reset his life. Sometimes I just need to go into my office and close the door and read an RSS feed or something like that. So this is why working from home is so much better for me.
So I was going to say, truth be told, I never had an office, but then truth also be told, I've worked from home 11 of the last 12 years, something like that. So in reality, I have actually always had an office with a door because it's been in my house.
Wow, way to just be a show off.
But never an office with a door in a office building.
Well,
yeah.
How's your new toy?
Well, my new toy is amazing. Should I use Apple words? It is magical. It is the best thing ever created. It's revolutionary. It is, what other adjectives do they use? Yeah, magical, revolutionary. I don't know that I would call it innovative, but my new toy takes very good pictures. I've been impressed with particularly the camera. I get what you have said. We've talked about this a little bit. And the new toy, if you haven't guessed yet, is the new iPhone. It doesn't feel any different than the 10, but the pictures, it takes really good pictures, especially the night mode. I'm excited to play with that more, kind of like we were talking about with the whole tripod versus handheld, but just the little playing I've done, night mode pictures, definitely an improvement.
Man, we should have gotten you
How's your new toy?
We should have gotten you a Pixel years ago.
Probably, but then it doesn't work with my Mac and my iMessage because as stupid as it actually sounds when I say it, the whole iMessage and integration with text messages between all my devices is marvelous.
Ah, yeah. See, you're part of the Blue Bubble Club. But if we sent you over to Europe and made you live in Europe or any other part of the world for a little while, you'd go, what the heck is iMessage? So, different things, different places you go.
Do you have a highlight of your new toy since we both got the same new toy?
Battery life.
Are you actually upgrading your new toy?
I don't know. See,
I haven't had mine long enough yet to play with battery life.
I went to the store yesterday to do a battery upgrade on an older one I was giving away, and
it's big.
It is big, but if battery life is the priority, then certainly going to something like the Max would be, God, that's such a dumb name, would be the way to do it. But yeah, no, I think I'm going to stick to the one that fits in my pocket and accept 4 hours of extra battery life instead of 5.
Do you know when battery life is going to shine or not shine? At Ignite. That is when I always have battery life issues.
Yeah, well, it's trying to pull a signal in the middle of a conference center with 20,000 other people, all that good kind of stuff. So
all trying to pull the same signal, and
we will see how it goes. Prioritizing battery life, being that I do work from home most of the time, battery life's not a big deal, right? There's a Qi charger on the desk and life's okay. It's more travel days or travel weeks, whatever those happen to be. living in Jacksonville, it's not like we're in a major hub for transportation where it's quick to get places. So if I have to fly to Seattle, well, that's an all-day trip for me. Or I've got a couple of trips coming up to Amsterdam and Paris for work. And, those are leave on Sunday, land on Monday kind of things. So having a 9-hour flight, it'd be nice to just have the phone work the entire time and be on the iPad and all those kinds of things. We'll see where it all falls out. I still have 1 week left where I can trade this one in and be within the return period. So
got it. Don't most of those flights though have like the USB charger by your seat?
They do, but who would plug into
some type of power port?
Who would plug into that? That's all like 1 amp crap. And then you're plugging your phone into a random Linux computer? Come on.
Hey, as long as Liam's not on your flight.
Yeah,
okay, so probably not just that.
Yeah,
There's probably all kinds of weird things. I plugged my Kindle, I think, into one of those once, and it had a whole issue of, it was like when you had to eject the Kindles and all of that, it went into the whole, like you can't read it, but it's plugged into a computer and you have to eject it before you can actually read it. There is no way to eject a Kindle from a power port on an airplane plugged into a Linux box because you can't get to the interface to actually eject it.
Oh, the things
I can charge it, but I can actually read it because, yes, I can eject it. And there's no way on a Kindle to like eject it from the Kindle. Anyways.
Hi, Linux.
Plugging devices into random computers.
Meet Linux.
Yeah. Everyone is always looking to save time in their day, just like moving to the cloud can save you from the mundane tasks of patching, updating, and maintaining servers. SameBox can save you from the mundane and time-consuming task of managing your email. SameBox works with your existing email configuration to make your mailbox awesome. It may be using Sane Black Hole to avoid mailing and cold sales emails, or Sane Reminders to automatically remind you when you need to follow up on an email. You can even snooze an email, just like that pesky alarm clock in the morning, to defer or to de-emphasize an email that doesn't need your immediate attention. So what are you waiting for? There's nothing to install, nothing to learn. Just go to sanebox.com/allthings. That's sanebox.com/allthings to get 2 weeks free and a $25 credit. So should we get into the continuation of last week's topic?
Oh, yes. I hold on. Let me put on my happy voice. I cannot wait.
You were trying to avoid it, weren't you? You were trying to distract me. So I spent the entire time talking about anything but this topic.
All right. Well, let's get into it.
Yes. So last week, if for some reason you didn't catch the last show, go listen to that one first, episode 144. The Acronym Soup one, because we had a couple listener questions asking all about Azure Information Protection, Advanced Threat Protection, Advanced Threat Analytics. What other acronyms did we throw in here? IRM, RMS, labels, all of that. So we started that last week. We kind of got through the whole RMS and how that tied into AIP. So now we're going to kind of go into more AIP and then dive back down into labels and how labels relate to AIP.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't talk about, because I didn't have it handy and I didn't pull it up until this week, was pricing for this. I am definitely not going into all the details because, truth be told, there are about 7 different ways to get different levels of AIP, whether it's through Microsoft 365 business plans, whether it's through EMS, whether it's through varying levels of Office 365, or there are just standalone Azure Advanced, not Azure Advanced, or protections, Azure Information Protection premium plans, P1 and P2 for like $2 and $5. So there is an article we will put in the show notes around some of the AIP pricing, but then also it includes all the different plans that it is included with. There's even, and I kind of remember these coming out, I don't know that we ever talked about them. There's like a security and compliance plan too, I think, that this is bundled into. Yeah, the Microsoft 365 compliance plan. So enterprise plans, compliance plans, business plans, EMS plans, or you just go buy it outright. So there are a slew of ways to get various levels. And then that pricing page does also have a comparison about what you get for free, what you get with Office 365, what you get with the Premium P1, and what you get with Premium P2.
Yeah, just a little bit of stuff going on there.
Yeah, so to try to talk through all of that and explain it is not easy, or even trying to say which of these features as we talk about them go into the different plans. So go use this pricing page if you're looking at AIP to figure out what features you need and what plans you may have and what plans you may want to buy to get those required features.
We'll let everybody else do the research on that.
So that was my precursor that we didn't actually talk about last week. So AIP, we talked about, again, it includes RMS. Now AIP and labels. Do you want to start with labels? Tag, you're it. I talked, your turn.
Well, my goodness. Wow, you're punchy today.
I am on my second cup of coffee, and I've been up for 2.5 hours already.
Yeah, so labels. You want to be able to apply metadata or classifications to your documents. We kind of talked about objects or document types that RMS can work with. Same kinds of things with AIP and labels out of the box. I'm a little bit confused about labels because they've changed so much over time. We used to have just regular labels, and then there was sensitivity labels, and now there's unified labeling. So I might lean on you a little bit here because
You're confused.
Well,
Okay.
because one of the things is we started getting all this stuff about unified labels, and now there's a migration path for labels. Really, we have to migrate our labels? What is that all look like? And what does that mean? Because that sounds kind of crazy.
It is, and I'm more than happy to talk about this. I just felt like throwing it to you to see what you would do.
I would have a conniption and 6 heart attacks.
Hit it back. Hit it back over the net to me. So yes, you're right. There are those different labels, and this is... it's metadata, but it's like its own field, and where you can apply these labels is different too. Like you said, there were the sensitivity labels and the retention labels, and that's actually where I'm going to start with labels, because unified labels kind of comes in later, and that's a part of that whole migration path is how do unified labels play into sensitivity labels and retention labels. So the names of these do kind of give it away a little bit. Sensitivity labels are sensitive documents. So think confidential documents, if you want to tag them as public documents. Think you're working for a company like Microsoft, where you have certain documents that probably outline stuff that is NDA, stuff that is NDA inside Microsoft only. And then you have your NDAs that apply to various people that have signed various NDA agreements. Then you have your general information that you're going to be able to share with everybody. Maybe if you're in a company like that, you pull up a document, you don't always know what that sensitivity is or how you want to protect it. That's where these sensitivity labels come in. So you can tag documents, you can tag emails, various file types with these sensitivity labels that you define. And that then leads to different protection and tying into some of those protection settings that we talked about last week, even around email. So sensitivity labels can encrypt email. So I don't know if you've ever seen it. If you're in Outlook Web Access and you have email encryption, up at the top, you have the whole option to encrypt an email. That kind of is tying in sensitivity labels. You can come up with other sensitivity labels that'll encrypt emails, that'll mark content such as adding watermarks, headers, footers, all of those based on these sensitivity labels. This also ties into data loss prevention. So if you have tagged content with these sensitivity labels, you can prevent that data loss using, I'm going to bring in another acronym, Scott, that we talked about. These sensitivity labels can use WIP or Windows Information Protection. You can also, depending on your plan, and this is where some of those different plans get into, start automatically applying these sensitivity labels based on content that's in a document. So if it finds HIPAA information, financial information, go in and automatically apply these labels to various documents, both in Office 365 and outside of Office 365, which, if we have time, we'll get into a little later. This very easily may turn into a 3 or 4-part episode trying to decipher all of this. So that's kind of an overview of those sensitivity labels, is more along the lines of just protecting that sensitive content with different methods, different options. And again, in the show notes, we'll link to a fairly lengthy article that does talk all about just an overview of these sensitivity labels and gives you some of that information to around what all they can do and how they work. The other thing about these, this is kind of like going back to the RMS, these travel with the document. So once you assign a sensitivity label to a email, to a file, to a document, that sensitivity label is part of the metadata on the document. So once it leaves your SharePoint environment, once it leaves your file system, that sensitivity label is going to travel with the document.
It does. And I think one of the confusing things here, just to kind of take a step back real quick, we're saying label a lot. So there's sensitivity label, retention label, and just that straight AIP label as well, right? That Azure Information Protection. Those are all different labels.
Yes, this is not the same label, and they're all available in different places. They're not always available in all the same places.
So we're talking about metadata that can be applied, quite often clear text, and, in this case with something like a sensitivity label surfacing inside of Office clients, except for Office Online. Thanks, Microsoft, coming soon.
Yes, this was the most bizarre rollout. Can I take a little tangent here?
Absolutely.
So sensitivity labels first came to Mac OS, iOS, and Android. Believe it or not, sensitivity labels, those desktop Office clients had sensitivity labels first. They literally just came out to Office clients. I think it was within the last couple weeks or maybe the last month. You now got the ability to apply sensitivity labels in the desktop Office 9/10, September 10, 2019, 2 weeks ago. You got it in Office for Windows, and we're still waiting for it to come to Office Online. Usually, I feel like it goes the other way. It starts in Office Online and then starts trickling down to various desktops. Just side note there. But you do have to be careful with that, because I did have a client wanting to do sensitivity labels. And at that point in time, they found out, it's only available to tag documents on the Mac. Really can't do this very well yet if we can only do it on a Mac, and all 7,000 of our users are on Windows PCs or using Office Online.
It's a consideration too. Like, you can't, like you said, force them over to mobile clients if they're already over here. It's not just, hey, I want to use this feature. It's potentially, and that feature has behavioral change associated with it, because we talked a little bit about change management a couple weeks ago. It's potentially driving change inside of the tools that you use to get it done, on top of maybe having to install new things like the labeling client and having those unified labels. And man, it is a messy thing out there.
Yes, which is probably why we kept getting questions about this, and the same reason we kept trying to avoid it and realized we better start trying to talk about this a little bit. Again, hopefully in a manner that makes sense, because it doesn't even always make sense in my own head. As IT professionals in the cloud era, sometimes it feels like we don't speak the same language as the rest of the organization. So when stakeholders from finance or other departments start asking about a specific project or team's Azure costs, they don't always realize how much work is involved in obtaining that information, sifting through cluttered CSVs and a complex mess of metadata in order to manually create custom views and reports. It's a real headache. On top of helping you understand and reduce your organization's overall Azure spend, ShareGate Overcast lets you group resources into meaningful cost hubs and map them to real-world business scenarios. This way, you can track costs in the way that makes most sense with your corporate structure, whether it's by product, business unit, team, or otherwise. It's a flexible, intuitive, and business-friendly way of tracking Azure infrastructure costs, and it's only available in ShareGate Overcast. Find out more on sharegate.com/ITPro. So, again, sensitivity labels, kind of like you said, make sure you understand those requirements. This is not something you just go turn on. This is a process between the change management, between figuring out the requirements, the licensing, the use cases, all of that. So in my head, sensitivity labels to me are probably the more confusing of the two, especially because those are the ones that tend to, if I'm remembering right, those are the ones that tend to trickle over into the unified labeling is more on sensitivity labels.
Yes.
Retention labels.
You need that unified labeling client to be able to do things like automated classification with sensitivity labels. So even though a sensitivity label is not a unified label, you do need the unified labeling client to make that stuff happen with auto labeling. Nice and fun.
Nice. And so retention labels, to me, actually, these make more sense. And they're a little bit easier to explain. And again, the label of these, or the title of these, really says it all. This is labeling content that has to be retained for a certain amount of period. So retention, retain your content. For instance, at least in the US, tax information, you have to retain it for 7 years. I have other clients that maybe are doing pharma stuff that actually have retention labels on some stuff of like 50 years. So retention labels are, let's tag this content with a particular retention label so that automatically, after a certain amount of time, this content will automatically be deleted or go into a disposition process where it goes through an approval of, yes, we're actually able to delete this content. Or on the flip side, it is not necessarily after X number of years automatically delete this, but we can't delete this in less than X number of years. So make sure this is retained for a minimum amount of time because we have to retain it for some set amount of time for legal reasons, for compliance reasons. So with these retention labels, you can go in, set up all these retention labels, and then set that retention policy on it of 7 years after this is last edited or last modified, go ahead and delete it. Again, it's just kind of going in and creating that process of how long should this data be retained or when should it be deleted based on when it was last modified. And there's a couple other triggers. I can't remember retain it. I can't remember, when it was created, when it was modified, or there is one that is when it was, I was looking at this when it was labeled. That one looks like a goofy one. I hadn't seen that one before. Usually it's just based on created and modified. I have had clients ask, they're like, well, we want to do it like 2 years after it's last been viewed. If nobody's viewed this particular file in 2 years, put it into some disposition process so that we can review it, delete it if it's no longer needed. Unfortunately, going off of when it was viewed in a retention policy isn't possible. I have not seen anything about if it ever will become possible.
Well, it's also messy in SharePoint land, at least, because there's processes that interact with your content outside of you.
AKA
search.
Yeah.
The indexer, things like that. So it gets a little bit messy. And that's where third-party products come into play. I want to dial back real quick to something that you said just to really drive it home. So you mentioned timing with these labels. So retention labels, again, it's just a label in its text. But I think the real beauty of them and kind of the power of them comes in when you have those retention label policies that then go ahead and kick you off into these deletion or disposition processes, whatever you've got. So there's kind of two paths there. One is, hey, I already have retention labels that are published, so they're sitting out there and they're available for users to select from. And then depending on where that content lives, does that content live in SharePoint, so either in SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business, or does it live in Exchange? There's kind of a different process to go ahead and get that data in there where it needs to be. So for stuff in SharePoint, it's one day. If you publish retention labels to Exchange, it can take up to 7 days for the label to appear. And then, then it starts to get a little bit messier outside of that. When you talk about auto application of labels, it generally tends to be a huge lag. So I forget exactly which day the job runs. It's on like Saturday or Sunday, right? That it goes ahead and kicks in for these. But effectively once a week is when your auto labels are applied. And then you have to wait for the next job to come in and say like, oh, hey, that thing's got a label on it now. Now go ahead and kick off the disposition process. So you might go ahead and play with this and say, I just want to get hands on and see what it does. So you'll set a label that says, let's put this into a disposition review after 1 day. And then you do that on Tuesday. Well, the job doesn't run until Sunday. So it's someplace over the weekend. I forget whether it's Saturday or Sunday, but that job doesn't run for 4 days. So even though the label is sitting there and it says, put me into disposition after a day, it'll sit there for 4 days. And then it'll go ahead and get kicked off into that process based on that other external job running along the way. So there's all sorts of weird timing things with the way Microsoft has implemented retention within these services based on labeling and some of the things that are in there. It doesn't work like maybe your on-premises DMS does, right? If you're a law firm and you're used to kicking in and saying like, okay, I've got my document loaded, it's been tagged with the case number, and based on that, we've got all this automated stuff that runs. In Microsoft land, that feels and is a little bit slower because it's just the reality of the way they do the processing for those.
Yeah, exactly. And it is because so much of this, especially SharePoint, is tied to timer jobs. And you alluded to this too, that you do have these certain jobs that on-prem, you could either force them to run or you could change the schedule. When you're in Office 365 SharePoint Online, you really don't have any control over those. It's entirely up to whatever Microsoft is set for when those will run. Because you did mention it, and that was something else I was going to talk about too, is you can set these two to auto-apply. So there's the whole, I'm going to classify my own emails with retention or classify my own documents. But in SharePoint, you also do have the option to apply a label to all the items in a library. So if you have a finance document library where you put a bunch of financial documents, or you have a research document library and you have certain retention based on research data that you want to keep, you can set a label to automatically apply to any item in a document library in SharePoint. And then when you go to the Exchange side, like you mentioned, you do have that option too to set these up with rules in Exchange where based on folders, based on certain information, you can auto-apply retention policies to emails that are going to people's mailboxes, as well as you can use labels with data loss prevention. So when you set up some of these data loss prevention rules, you can use labels in here where if a content contains a certain label, so this is flipping a little bit. It's not auto-applying labels, but if content contains a certain label, go ahead and set a certain DLP policy on it based on the retention label that is set. And if you get into sensitivity, you can actually use the same sensitive information types that can apply to with sensitivity labels. It kind of gets into a big spiderwebby mess there when you start dealing with DLP and labels as well. It's like another podcast episode.
Yeah.
This is going to be the episode that never ends.
It is. It's just so far down the rabbit hole. Because it'd be so easy to say, hey, I want to tag my content, and based on a tag on my content, I want some stuff to happen on my schedule. And it's just not the way these things are built. When I used to do SharePoint or like Office 365 a lot, I would always talk about it as everything light. So sure, it's content management, but it's CMS light. Like it's not a real CMS. It doesn't follow the same paradigms and publishing mechanisms. It's document management light inside of SharePoint. And same thing over here. This isn't a full-blown, like, you're not going to run your hardcore retention and disposition system off this thing. Like Microsoft might say you are, but you're just not going to.
There are some
not without some third-party stuff.
Yes, and there are some third parties out there. I'm not going to start naming them because that's dangerous, but we have talked to people on the podcast before who have worked for some of these third parties, and there's a few options out there. I've worked with some other ones for a client, so there's maybe 3 or 4 big ones out there that I'm at least familiar with that all kind of take this whole data retention, data management to another level in Office 365. Opsgility is disrupting cloud training as we know it with their on-demand platform, Skill Me Up. Their new design focuses on a user flow to better support role-based learning paths with these great new features. Real-time, hands-on labs are now included with each subscription to build your skills competence. Hundreds of cloud courses with more added daily to transform your skills for today's cloud-first careers. Role-based learning paths guide you through associated level courses in an easy-to-view layout and tracker. Microsoft Azure and Microsoft 365 certification prep courses and labs to support you leading up to exam day. Learn more and start your free 3-day trial at www.skillmeup.com. So, with that, we still have unified labels and MIP and WIP and a bunch of other stuff. Should we continue in part 3 and dive into how unified labels tie into all of this?
Yeah, I suppose. I thought, we'd start at the top, but now we're back. Yeah, and maybe that's the way we do it, is we keep starting at the top with AIP and then diving into these little bits and pieces. Because
we dive into these different subsets of topics within AIP. Yeah, I think that would be because, so as a precursor, once you start diving into unified labeling, you start getting into stuff like the AIP scanner. Unified labeling is kind of a combination of a few things that will also kind of bring us into the advanced threat protection and how unified labeling works with advanced threat protection. So that would probably be another good episode with just kind of what is unified labeling, because there's a bunch of stuff there as well. Probably more than we want to dive into today.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
All right, perfect. Well, again, thanks for listening. Join in next time for part 3, to be continued, ... once more. All right.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Scott. If you enjoyed the podcast, go leave us a 5-star rating in iTunes. It helps to get the word out so more IT pros can learn about Office 365 and Azure. If you have any questions you want us to address on the show or feedback about the show, feel free to reach out via our website, Twitter, or Facebook. Thanks again for listening and have a great day.